I run the standards department and the standards director at IICRC. Every sentence and every word carries weight. And so often we've spent an hour and we did 3 sentences. Once all of that is done, that's when we have the green light to sort of take that draft forward for publication. And then again, there are imperfections. And then these standards, once they are published, we have a requirement to revise and republish all of our standards within a 5-year cycle. That 5-year revision cycle gives us a chance to fix anything that may have missed.
Hey folks, Ben with Magic Plan here. We've got an interesting episode for you today. I'm joined by Mili Washington, Standards Director at IICRC. She's been in this role since 2011, and she's here to provide some insight into the super interesting world of standards creation and review. How are you doing, Mili?
I'm good, Ben. How about you?
Can't complain. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, Mili, before we get started and I start asking you a bunch of questions, how about you just give us a little bit of background information? Who are you? What do you do? And why are you doing what you do?
Okay, absolutely. I am Mili Washington. I have been with IICRC since 2011, so quite a while now. And I run the standards department and the standards director at IICRC, which is the Institute of Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification. And at the base of everything that we do at the Institute lie the standards. That's where our certification is built, our training, everything else comes from the foundation of the standards. And so that's my role here at IICRC to shepherd the standards process, that development process of putting together accredited ANSI approved standards, which then become the de facto standard in the industry for cleaning, restoration, and inspection. I am a standards professional. This is what I do. This is what I did before IICRC. I'm certified in standards. How could I not be, right? And I love what I do because of the people that I work with, and then the end product, of course, which is the standards, which we see as shaping the industry and shaping the future.
Interesting. And so I'm guessing, what does a typical day look like for you in your job? Um, could you describe
Lots
that?
of calls, Ben. Lots of calls. Lots of Zoom meetings. I work remotely, and so basically, I'm working with people around the world, mostly U.S. and Canada. But then we have committee members that are in different parts of Europe, in Australia, New Zealand, things like that. So that's what the day looks like: is a lot of drafting of standards, a lot of helping consensus bodies, which is our committees are called consensus bodies, and those are the industry experts that come together and write these standards, and I spend a good bulk of my time sort of helping with that process. It's a multi-year process. It is a labor of love. It takes time and effort, and so it keeps me very busy. And then these standards, once they are published, we have a requirement to revise and republish all of our standards within a 5-year cycle. So I suppose some would say job security for me. But that's, yeah, lots of Zoom.
So, so let's jump into it then. In terms of the standards development process, I mean, you said that this is a multi-year process. You have an auditing process, what you said every 5 years, right? Um, what is the typical steps involved in the development of one of these IICRC standards?
Yeah, I'll try to give a bit of a summarized view of what that looks like because I'm obviously condensing what takes a
Hmm.
long time, right? We
Hmm.
start off with either an existing standard, for example, something that we have published that has been published a few years ago and we need to revise it. So that's one aspect. And then the other is either IICRC internally or externally, we may get a request for a new standard to draft or develop a brand new standard. And as long as there is a need and a gap in the industry, and it is within the scope of what IICRC does, then we initiate a new standard. We do all of this through ANSI, which is the American National Standards Institute, because we are accredited by ANSI as a standards developer. And so we initiate a new standard or a revision through ANSI, we accept applications for a good deal of time, weeks and months usually, before we put together a consensus body. Consensus body is the group of standards experts that come together and start drafting a standard or look at an existing standard and revise it. They will typically spend, yeah, years on a new standard, and at least a year on a revision, kind of looking at things and putting things together, and essentially compiling what is the standard of care in the industry. And what that means is, when we say the term standard of care, what we mean is what is already being done, excuse me, in the industry by the prudent and competent professional. So it's not the ceiling, it's not best practice, it's not what is the best I could possibly do in this field. It is what is already happening, and we're sort of capturing it in our standards. And so that process can take a while. And I mean, if you can imagine, every sentence and every word carries weight. And so often we've spent an hour and we did three sentences, and it's still a feeling of accomplishment because those were important sentences. So that process will take a while of the drafting or the revision. And once the consensus body is ready or pleased with their product, then we put it out for public review, which is essentially an open period, either 45 days or 30 days, depending on where we are in the process, where the entire draft standard, initially anyway, is made available to anyone, any stakeholders who would like to take a look at it. It's made available through our website, where it can be downloaded and comments can be submitted. Now, a commenter can submit one comment or 1,000 comments. There is no limitation. And we do get a lot of comments on our standards, and we consider that to be a very important. It's painful, yes, but we consider it to be a very important aspect of the standards development process, because when we're drafting a standard, we have, somewhere between 10 and 20 people putting together something that is of great importance to the industry, and they are relying on their collective expertise and experience. But there are gaps in that, right? So that public review process ensures that we're hearing from other stakeholders, other perspectives that we may have missed. We're hearing from people who are looking at a draft for the first time and saying, well, that doesn't make sense, or that's not clear to me, or that can be interpreted in five different ways. So that's all good, feedback for our consensus bodies to get, for them to say, oh my gosh, yeah, we missed it, or we have gone into too much depth and it's too scientific. Let's pare it down a little bit so it can be understood by most people who would be reading the standard. And so typically a consensus body will make many, many changes as a result of public review. Typically we'll have anywhere between 1 to 5 rounds of public review. It depends on the standard and what changes we continue to make. As we make more changes, we have to do more public review. So it's a very robust process that ensures that we get feedback from the industry, that ensures that we incorporate that feedback and make changes to the standard based on, the comments that come in. Once all of that is done, and assuming we have done it satisfactorily, which means we don't have any unresolved objectors, every public review commenter says, yeah, that looks good. Thank you for making those changes, or I understand why you didn't make those changes. That's when we have the green light to sort of take that draft forward for publication. And
Okay.
and it's an amazing feeling. And then again, there are imperfections. Every single document that is put out, there are imperfections, and so that 5-year revision cycle gives us a chance to fix anything that we may have missed, or if there have been any improvements or updates in the industry, it gives us a chance to keep the document current. And so, so that's sort of the ANSI process in a nutshell. We have a lot of very hefty requirements that we must follow along the process,
Mhm.
including things like balance. So our consensus bodies cannot be all producers or manufacturers. We have to have a balance of producers and users and general interest. We have to make sure that we notify stakeholders. We have to make sure that we do public review. We have to make sure that there is due process for any comment that gets submitted. We as an organization get audited by ANSI every 5 years so that they can ensure that we are doing what we say we're doing. So It's quite the process. It's not for the weak at heart. Um, but I think the end product sort of speaks for itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you mentioned that, this is culmination of several years of work to come up with a standard that makes it from draft phase to published state, right? And then every single one of these standards is then reviewed on a 5-year cycle. Is there a prioritization of standards, or is it simply a fixed 5-year schedule from published date? There is a fixed 5-year increment that you require this to be audited and reviewed.
Well, typically it is 5 years, but there are exceptions. For example,
Mm.
if there have been significant changes in the industry, or say we missed something and we cannot wait 5 years to fix that, so we might pick up a standard sooner than that, or we may have done a limited revision and we want to go in and do a more in-depth revision. So there are many reasons for doing that. The maximum we wait is 5 years, but we try to initiate that process well before that 5-year mark.
Okay, interesting, interesting.